Welcome to Royal Haunts and Part 1 of the House of Stuart and the Commonwealth. On the instant of Elizabeth I dying, Sir Robert Carey, the grandson of Mary Boleyn, rode with a ring from the Queen to present to King James VI as a sign that she was passing the mantle on to the Scots. There is still doubt as to whether Elizabeth named anyone. Apart from James, there were other contenders, though distant as Elizabeth tended to rid herself of any close ties. James was just over 1 year old when he was proclaimed King of Scotland, his father having been assassinated with the possible involvement of his mother, and though there was no proof, Mary Queen of Scots was forced to abdicate. Her people having turned against her, Mary would either have been murdered by some means while imprisoned, or have been put on trial with a more public execution. But she still had friends, and managing to escape, and thinking her cousin Elizabeth I was also her friend, she opted to seek help from England rather than fleeing to the continent. And once in England, Mary found herself under arrest, and over a period of 19 years was moved from one dank, draughty place to another. Elizabeth was finally pressured into signing the death warrant on the Queen, and Mary was executed within the walls of Fotheringay Castle. The castle was later torn down, and the site commemorated with a pile of stones. Elizabeth went into an overzealous show of grief and remorse, but once Mary was out of the way there would be no more threat of her taking the English crown or returning to overthrow her son James. It was thought a pact was made in secret between Elizabeth and James that he would succeed her in return for taking no act of revenge against his mother's death. In effect, Elizabeth handed the crown to Scotland after so many of England's kings had attempted to invade and rule. Henry VII certainly wouldn't have wanted to see a Scottish king rule England, though it was mainly his doing in marrying his daughter Margaret into the Scottish monarchy to add Tudor blood to the line. Henry VIII was another, having bypassed his older sister, and when Henry was in between wives, having made both his daughters illegitimate, his youngest sister's line was looked on for the succession. During Elizabeth's reign, taxes and an increase in colonisation and overseas trade had seen England become a wealthy country, even though the standards of living for the lower classes had dropped considerably. Seeing this as a land of milk and honey, James quickly made preparations for his court to move to London. Though this was a great conquest for Scotland, there were mixed feelings, with fears that the English would force its laws and decisions upon them, as well as the fact that they were losing their king. The coming of James to the English throne also fulfilled a prophecy, even though it may have been long in coming. During Edward I's raids, he saw his conquest over Scotland when he took possession of what was said to be a magic stone. It's been given a variety of names, but is probably better known as the Stone of Scone, as that is where it was kept, and where kings held their coronation. Being nothing unusual to look at, it is more of a traditional piece in which Scottish kings had been ceremonially crowned. If the claimant was not true, it was said the stone would call out against any usurper. Some believed the real stone was hidden, and the English took a replacement. However, in the mind of Edward I, while he possessed the stone, he was King of Scotland. He even had a chair made to house the stone, and his son, Edward II, was the first to sit upon it for his coronation, with every monarch thereafter making the claim on Scotland, even though it wasn't a reality. It wasn't until James sat upon the throne for his own coronation, making him James I of England, that he fulfilled the prophecy that wherever the stone, Scotland shall rule. Though for such an important artefact, neither James nor any of the Stuarts made an attempt to return the stone to Scotland. It was after several debates, and at one point the stone being stolen, that it was returned 300 years later, and is now housed at Edinburgh Castle, with the agreement that it will be returned to Westminster Abbey whenever the next coronation should be. With many of the Scottish homes having a reputation for being haunted, James may well have got the chance to witness some of these apparitions. He certainly held a fascination with the paranormal as well as witchcraft. It was during the time of his arranged marriage to Anne of Denmark that a plot to assassinate him with the aid of witchcraft came to light. With James' future wife being unable to traverse the stormy seas, James was too impatient to wait and sailed to Norway, where Anne was waiting for better weather. It's a very romantic tale, in that James, on setting eyes upon Anne of Denmark, was so taken by her beauty that he ordered the marriage to take place immediately. On returning to Scotland, it could well be expected to be stormy, with winter settling in, and with one ship sinking with all aboard. James was lucky to make it into port. We should also remember that these were superstitious times, when wild imaginings could be taken for fact, and though James was an intelligent man, one must wonder what he did actually see when he described air-like creatures bobbing on the surf in what appeared to be sieves. James himself took this to be some sign of witchcraft, and what came about was the North Berwick witch trials, where numerous females, fewer men, and Francis Stuart, the 5th Earl of Bothwell, were tried for attempting to assassinate the king by means of witchcraft, and James was not satisfied to leave the matter to others, becoming personally involved in the interviews with the witches. To get the names of other conspirators, it was not unusual to use torture in the form of thumbscrews, or what was called the boot, which slowly crushed the legs. For most of those found guilty, they were burnt to death on Castle Hill. This experience led James to publish a book called Demonology, which is still in print, and something that was adhered to, and is said to have even contributed towards the wave of witch trials that followed. And with his interest in the paranormal, when a case of poltergeist activity brought people from miles around to visit the vicarage at Wilcot in Wiltshire, James is said to have paid a visit in person. Each night a bell would toll in one of the bedrooms, but could only be heard from within the room itself. The phenomena was said to have begun when the vicar refused to ring the church bell at night. The disgruntled parishioner procured a wizard from Devizes to cast a spell. The tolling only ceased when the wizard died, never being heard again. The vicarage has since been rebuilt, and so the one that stands there today is not the one and same. James ruled Scotland for 58 years, but rarely returned after moving to London, reigning over England for 22 years. From the time of Henry VIII, the English court was noted for its lavish feasting and fine ales, and so it's no wonder that with the onset of gout, having suffered a stroke, James died with his most trusted friend and adviser, the Duke of Buckingham, by his bedside.